What happened next was too much for live TV. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who had nothing to lose, brought forth a secret inquiry, and Melania Trump couldn't stay quiet this time. It was intended to be just another political segment, with 4 guests, 1 host, and a primetime audience that wanted to see more of the same. People watching from their living homes all throughout the U.S. had no idea they were about to see one of the most shocking things to happen in a long time. The set was normal: dark blue backlit panels, high chairs, and coffee mugs that no one actually drank from. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat third from the left in a fitted blue blazer. She seemed calm, almost reserved. For the first 20 minutes, her face didn't change much. She listened, took notes, and didn't say anything. But as the host changed the subject to politics and ethics, things changed. The camera moved to Melania Trump, who was sitting opposite from Jasmine. She looked elegant and calm. She was doing what she had done many times before, using her charm to avoid harsh questions. The crowd didn't blink. They have seen this before. But Jasmine leaned forward, not too far, just tearfully enough to say, "I'm ready." "Well," Jasmine began, her voice smooth but forceful, "since we're talking about ethics, let's stop pretending that some people get a free pass just because they married someone." The panel became quiet. The host blinked. Melania turned her head a little. "I'm sorry, was that meant for me?" Jasmine didn't move. She reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly packed folder. She didn't do it in a hurry or in a dramatic way. She put it on the table, took off the clip, and started putting photocopied records in order. Jasmine remarked in a calm voice, "These are transaction logs, filings for offshore accounts, and a report from an investigation that was dropped in upstate New York. All of them are linked to shell companies used in the late 2000s, and every one of them has something to do with your name." You could hear a pin drop. Melania's eyes moved down to the papers. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at the host. She finally responded, "That's crazy," with a timid smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is clearly an attack. I won't believe in conspiracy theories." "It's not a theory if there are court records and bank records to back it up," Jasmine said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Producers were running around behind the cameras. Someone in the control booth was waving their arms around a lot. One of the helpers gave the host a letter, but it was too late to fix the problem. People on social media were recording and clipping live clips of the debate. Hashtags like #CrockettVS, Melania, and #JasmineHasReceipts started to trend within minutes. Melania tried to change course. Jasmine gently interrupted, "We're here to talk about the future of America, not dig up old nonsense from other countries. With all due respect, when your past raises questions about money laundering and influence, it is America's future." The moderator finally got his voice back and sought to change the subject. "Please stay on topic." "I'm on topic," Jasmine responded, not looking away. "The topic is accountability." People at home were glued to their TVs. No one had ever talked to Melania like that, especially not on live national television. They didn't have facts or proof, and they didn't have the kind of confidence that says, "I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm risking." And just like that, the story got out of the studio's control. But Jasmine had already come to terms with what might happen next before she even touched the folder. 3 days before the roundtable, Jasmine and her chief of staff sat in a quiet corner booth at a restaurant just outside Fort Worth. The servers there still called you Han and replenished your coffee without asking. Jasmine didn't want to eat. She had a folder in front of her that wasn't the identical one she would hold on live TV, but it was close. "This isn't just political," her assistant Kenny Rose stated in a hushed voice as he leaned in. "You're talking about Melania Trump. They're going to come after you hard." Jasmine mixed her coffee but didn't drink it. "Let them," she murmured softly. "People need to stop acting like she was just a part of all this." "There is documentation, Kenny. There's proof." Kenny sighed and looked out the window. "Proof doesn't always win. Sometimes it just gets you buried." She didn't answer immediately away. Jasmine had spent most of her adult life going into rooms where she wasn't supposed to communicate, let alone lead. She was a black woman from the south side of Dallas, with no family money or heritage name, just grit and receipts. She struggled her way through law school, worked as a public defender for years, and finally made it to Congress with the help of grassroots supporters who believed in her fire. Not them, Ben Mullet, Kona Bessibeka, but buried them out. Mila dad naming, on burles banals, on molva. Them is the one that me can buried it in, and that is in Glemelin, that come any man, you know I or the others bad end of the. We'll have with the problems, we'll lay back Nemad, women and women up. When it's seven battle and Bundy this feet. Them and become bourbon and makeup, or that in Beckenberg and bite and Bemek and niggas. Poor arm bopper, or to board and he been banner did Did you have one and then big use? Woman the name in banner, I mean that. Everyone in Washington liked her, but they were afraid of how smart she was when she talked. I'm not trying to start a fire, she finally answered. I'm trying to show people that it's already on fire. That night, back at her apartment, she read over every paper again. There were reports from a fraud case in Syracuse that no one ever followed up on, and autographs from Melania's supposed European trips, but the names were misspelled and the dates were wrong. There were also the bank records, which showed wire transactions to fake businesses in the British Virgin Islands that were made just a year before Donald Trump started his campaign. She didn't know everything, but she had enough pieces to see what had been hidden before. There was still a weight to it, though, not only the prospect of lawsuits or political fallout. This was a risk for me. She wasn't just going after a past first lady. She was fighting the machines that had kept powerful people safe for decades. A message from a friend at an independent store in Pittsburgh buzzed her phone. Are you really going to do this? They'll change it. They'll say you're angry and unstable. Jasmine looked at the screen for a time before saying, they always say that until they can't. The next morning, she called Dolores Finney, a retired federal clerk who had surreptitiously given her the Syracuse case files years before. Dolores was in her late 70s now, mostly off the grid, but still smart. Are you sure you're ready to go public? Dolores asked, her voice quiet and hoarse across the phone. Jasmine said, they've buried too much. You and I both know that this woman's past didn't just go away. It was meant to be erased. Dolores stopped for a moment, then replied with a dry laugh, you have bigger balls than half the people I worked with at the DOJ. Jasmine smiled, but the weight on her chest never completely went away. There was always a clock ticking somewhere in the distance when she was brave. When she came into the studio on the day of the show, the folder seemed heavier than it should have, not physically, but emotionally. She knew she wouldn't get another chance. If she didn't say it plainly the first time, the moment would get lost in the fake anger and PR spin. But no one saw the talk she had with herself in the hallway mirror 10 minutes before the show started. Be precise. Stay calm. Don't shout. Let the facts do the shouting, she added. Then she murmured the same 3 words she always spoke before going into something that worried her, tell the truth. She passed by the stage manager, the flashing red countdown light, and the guests who were faking smiles because they assumed today would be just like any other day. She didn't notice a former First Lady when she sat down and looked across the table at Melania Trump. She observed someone who was safe because of silence, and Jasmine had already made up her mind that she wasn't going to stay quiet longer. But to really comprehend what Jasmine knew, we need to look even further into the things Melania tried to hide for years. Melania Naus from Sebnica, Slovenia was merely Melania Naus until she became famous. The glossy stories and prepared interviews made it sound like her climb from a little hamlet in Eastern Europe to First Lady was a fairy tale. But Jasmine Crockett didn't care about fairy tales. She wanted to know what parts of the story had been left out. Troy Widman, a smart 24-year-old intern of hers, was the first to point out problems with Melania's early business and modeling records. They had been going through old European registrations and uncovered 3 companies linked to her name. None of these were ever mentioned during her husband's campaign. Troy told Jasmine one afternoon in their little Capitol Hill office she signed off on a patent application in Zurich in '98. The problem is, he went on, she said in interviews that she was already living in the U.S. full-time by then. Jasmine bent over the papers. What kind of patent? Designs for jewelry. Not very clear. But the paper trail doesn't end until 2003, which suggests that she was still doing business overseas, long after she said she wasn't. It could have seemed innocent. Old papers and jewelry designs. But Jasmine had been a lawyer long enough to know what offshore accounts were often used for, especially when the transactions didn't match the public timetables. After that, the Pennsylvania link came along. In 2006, a lawsuit was filed in Allegheny County under the name Messnaus Holdings. At first, it seemed like a normal real estate disagreement, but there was a sealed document in the appendix that said there was wire fraud, but the signatures were blacked out. The judge, who is now retired, had closed the file for national security reasons. No one looked any deeper. Nobody wanted to. Troy raised his head from his laptop. She has too many names linked to too many little dodgy businesses. She was either laundering money or she is the unluckiest businesswoman in the planet. That comment stayed with Jasmine for days. She started making a chronology from 1996 to 2006 that included modeling jobs, problems with her green card, a fashion line registered in New Mexico under her cousin's name, and a consulting company in Miami that only lasted a short time and had no workers and one huge loan. It wasn't simply strange, it was planned. Jasmine got in touch with someone in Harrisburg who used to work in the state's financial crimes unit. He agreed to talk as long as his name didn't show up in any official documents. You want to know what I think? After looking through the files Jasmine gave over, he said it was a cover operation, shells to get money through. Not huge enough to make the news, but just big enough to keep people quiet. And what about the federal agencies? They either weren't looking or someone warned them not to. It wasn't the crimes themselves that hurt the most. It was how quickly hush fell when the names became powerful. Melania had worked hard for years to create her reputation as an elegant observer who was never quite there when judgments were made. People thought she was distant but not dangerous, but Jasmine saw it differently. The distance wasn't a sign of being detached. It was a sign of being safe. The more she looked into it, the more it became evident that Melania had more than simply privilege. She had learned how to hide behind it. Jasmine kept thinking about one event, a charity gala in Dallas in 2012. A local business had asked Jasmine to come as a guest. Melania had flown in for a short visit. She talked for 12 minutes, didn't answer any questions, and then departed through the back corridor with 2 males who weren't on her staff list. Jasmine remembered because it was the first time she saw how careful Melania was, even while they were all friends. She isn't untouchable, Jasmine said to Kenny one late night at work. She just walks like no one is allowed to ask questions. Kenny looked tired. Yes, but if you ask, make sure you have answers that no one can twist. Jasmine held up the stack of folders that was getting bigger. That's exactly what I'm making. When she had had enough, she stopped talking about it. She didn't taunt the reporters with it. She didn't provide parts to pundits. She was patient. She looked. She chose the right time. And when the live roundtable came knocking, she realized it wasn't about getting political points. It was about pressing the issue that too many people had ignored. Why has this woman's background always been off limits? But it got even more convoluted because of the case that never made it to court. It disappeared just as it was getting interesting. The cover of the case file didn't have a title. It just had a date, June 17th, 2011, and a place, Syracuse, New York. It was only 12 pages long, yet every sentence in it was important. Rodney Klein, a retired paralegal who had worked for the U.S., had given it to Jasmine, the Northern District of New York's attorney's office. He still had copies of old files that the system had lost. Rodney stated as he passed the file across his kitchen table, This one wasn't supposed to go away, but someone made it go away. There was a message inside that mentioned a woman named McNaws, which was a name Melania used before she changed the spelling of her name in official U.S. records. The letter talked about a federal investigation into a possible plot to route money through minor real estate acquisitions, quick resales, and payments made outside the U.S. that didn't match tax records. At the time, the main witness, an accountant from Slovenia named Lydia Korchi, was working with the IRS in secret. Rodney said that she had been living in Buffalo on a temporary visa and worked via an amnesty program for whistleblowers, but she had to pay for her help by disappearing. 2 weeks after this memo, she ceased coming to check-ins, never picked up her last payment, and her flat was cleaned out overnight. Jasmine turned the pages. Is there any chance she went home? Rodney shook his head. Passports were flagged, no flight records, nothing. The case was marked as inactive at the time. It was finally closed since there wasn't enough evidence to justify it. In sum, the case would have died peacefully without Lydia. No publicity, no one to blame. Jasmine thought about that for a long time. She got in touch with Chelsea Morano, a local writer at the Syracuse Herald, who had briefly covered the subject when it initially came out. But at the time, no one knew how big it was, and not many people cared. Chelsea informed her over the phone. I remember that. We tried to follow up, but the federal office wouldn't let us. Then 2 of our editors were called into private meetings, and the story suddenly disappeared. Did you ever hear Melania's name used in connection with it? Chelsea thought for a moment. Never on record, but people talked about it back then. We felt it was nuts. I mean, a Slovenian model who was involved in money laundering through real estate seems like a stretch. But now I'm not so sure. Jasmine looked out the window of her office and watched the rain flow down the glass. There is a lot of discreet, skilled intervention going on in this case. There was also a list of 7 properties in upstate New York that were bought and sold through shell corporations. They bought each one for less than $400,000, sold it within 18 months for at least twice that amount, with no renovations and no obvious buyers, just paper trails that ran in circles. A trust connected to a man Melania is said to have dated in the 1990s bought 3 of those residences. This man had strong ties to European banking networks. The pattern became obvious the more Jasmine looked. People were moving around like chess pieces, and if you asked the incorrect question, the game was over. She printed out every paper, map, and note and stuck them all up on the wall of her office, like a detective putting together a cold case. Kenny came in one afternoon and just looked. You're not going to let this go, are you? Jasmine didn't even look up. Would you? He shook his head and then sat down. So what's the plan? We show people that power leaves fingerprints, even when it wears a designer dress and smiles for the cameras. There was one last element in the file that Jasmine couldn't ignore, an unsigned, typed, and scanned letter. It said, to whom it may concern, there are names you shouldn't say and places you shouldn't look. Don't expect applause if you keep going. Be ready for silence. Be ready for doors to close. But do it anyhow. Do it anyway. Jasmine read that sentence over and over again, even though she didn't know who wrote it. That letter was why she didn't think twice when she got the roundtable invitation. She printed the papers, packed the folder, and didn't tell anyone, not even her communications director, what she was going to do. The loudest thing you can do is talk when a system depends on silence. But the roundtable didn't simply take Melania off stride. It took up a universe that was painstakingly planned and not meant to be questioned. The producers had everything planned out to the second. There was a 7-minute introduction about bipartisan approach, followed by a short debate about immigration reform. Then there was a 10-minute panel on political accountability, and that's when they put Jasmine in. What she brought with her was not something they had planned for, or anybody else had planned for. The studio was in Stamford, Connecticut, which is a neutral place with no DC. No acting, no pretending on Capitol Hill. The cameras were hidden, but the stakes were real. 1 host, 5 guests, and 4 microphones. The segment was supposed to be smooth, safe, and easy to forget. Felix Roman, the host, had been doing this for more than 20 years. He was the kind of anchor who could handle controversy like it was a dance routine until now. The room changed as Jasmine put the proof in front of her. Felix stared at the camera and then back at Jasmine, obviously not knowing if he should break or lean in. The producers in the control room waved their arms wildly through the glass, but he didn't move. There was something in her voice that kept him. "You mean that Melania Trump was involved in financial wrongdoing while her husband was running for president?" he said, attempting to slow things down. "I'm saying," Jasmine said, turning to another page in her folder, "that there were financial structures linked to her name. Structures that moved money through New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware under the names of companies that didn't exist past a single tax season." Melania's face didn't shift, but she held on to the arms of her chair a little tighter. The public relations assistant, who was seated just off camera, moved in her seat. Felix made another attempt. "These are serious claims. Have they been checked?" Jasmine added, "Most of them have been ignored," and her voice never rose. "But they were never out of sight. You only had to look, and someone eventually did. A tape of that line, 'You just had to look,' was leaked online before the piece was even over." Melania finally said anything. "This is a political show. I'm not going to respond to these lies since they don't deserve it." Jasmine looked her in the eye for the first time. "If they're lies, you should want an investigation. Be quiet." The lights in the studio even felt hotter. Felix coughed. "Okay, let's go back to," but it was already too late. The control room's earpieces were ringing with calls from network affiliates and advertisers. Some wanted the feed to stop, while others begged them to keep it going. They had never been this involved in real time before. Melania changed her plan. "You're attacking me because you don't have a real plan. You aren't talking about health care or the economy. You can't stop yourself from knocking down successful women." Jasmine's answer was quick but strong. "Success that comes at the cost of silence and manipulation is worth looking into. I don't want to hurt anyone. I'm here to say something when too many people have been advised to ignore it." The panelists didn't move. One of them, a former federal prosecutor from Phoenix, said to the person next to him, "This is going to blow up big time." Felix shook his head and walked off stage after the segment was over. He said, "We just showed the most important 7 minutes of the year, and none of it was in the script." Melania left in a hurry, with no press availability or handshake. Her staff acted swiftly. Her assistant was on the phone with a lawyer before they even got to the elevator. During cleanup, a junior staff member sought to get the folder back from Jasmine's desk. She had already taken it with her. A handful of the makeup workers clapped silently as Jasmine came by backstage. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. Her phone was already vibrating constantly by the time she got to the curb outside. She had messages, missed calls, and Twitter notifications going off all over the place. One text stood out. It came from a woman Jasmine hadn't talked to in years, a retired IRS investigator from Cleveland. It said, "You said what most of us were too scared to say. I'm proud of you." But Jasmine didn't have time to think about it. There was going to be a backlash, and it wouldn't be subtle. What started in a studio chair was about to spread across the political system like a broken cable that no one could fix. When Jasmine got back to her hotel room, her phone had 67 missed calls, 23 voicemails, and hundreds of text messages. She threw it on the bed and stood at the window, watching the cars go by as if nothing had occurred. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding for the first time all day. Kenny was already getting calls from the media down the hall. MSNBC, The Hill, and a few podcasts were among them. Everyone wanted to know what had just transpired. Jasmine, on the other hand, wasn't thinking about interviews. She was wondering about how quickly the machine was going to push back, and it didn't take long. At 10:14 p.m., Melania's lawyers sent out a carefully worded statement. The Congresswoman's comments were false and slanderous. We're looking at all legal ways to safeguard Mrs. Trump's reputation from slander that is based on politics. The phrase exploring all legal options was the signal, the warning shot, and the attempt to scare. Kenny came into the room with his laptop open. He said they're calling it character assassination, and Fox is already calling it a racist attack from an angry black woman. Jasmine didn't move. Let them go around. The papers are true. Kenny said they don't have to. They only need to make people doubt. Messages from coworkers, strangers, and even staffers from across the aisle filled her inbox. Some were supportive, but the ones that didn't have a name were the most interesting. One email said, "You think you're brave? Keep pushing and you'll disappear just like the last one." The other one was just a video attachment, footage of her heading to her car the night before, recorded from across the street. When Kenny saw it, he said, "You need to report this." Jasmine said, "I know, but first, I want to know who sent it." A cybersecurity company that was on retainer started looking right away. They found the IP address to be a proxy server in Odessa, Texas. There was no obvious identifier and no easy way to find her, but Jasmine had done this kind of shadow work before. The threats didn't surprise her. It was how quickly the PR machine sought to change the story. Within hours, right-wing commentators were all over social media, saying that Jasmine made the documents up. Some even suggested she had a personal problem with Melania that went back years, which is a total lie. That night, Jasmine's name was trending with words like race baiting, publicity stunt, and fake scandal. The plan was clear: make her look bad before anyone really looked at what she said. But the point was, some individuals had already done it. Around midnight, Farrah Odom, a reporter for the Indianapolis Ledger, made a post that went over Jasmine's papers line by line. She sent scans of court records, timelines, and the dates of the transactions. It got more than 600,000 likes and almost 100,000 retweets in less than 3 hours. Farrah was not a commentator. She was a fact-checker who was regarded, quiet, and very accurate. Her last tweet said, "If even half of what Representative Crockett said is true, it should get the attention of Congress." This isn't drama, it's fraud. That's when the tone began to change. Jasmine sat up and read every article and comment. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like the beginning of something she couldn't stop. Then the email came, and it made her stop. The topic line says, "About the Syracuse memo from 2011. No name, no sender." She clicked inside. It was just one sentence. "You missed the transfer to the Cayman Islands. Look at the dates." There was a PDF attached that featured 3 wire transfer records she hadn't seen previously. The name of the account matched one of the show businesses she had reported earlier in the week. Kenny looked over her shoulder. "Where did this come from?" "I don't know," Jasmine responded, "but it's real." That night, she didn't sleep. There was too much movement and too many parts falling at once. The next morning, when she got to her office in D.C., there were a lot of messages waiting for her. One was from the Office of Congressional Ethics, another was from a Legal Oversight Committee, and the last one was from a Republican senator's aide asking for a private meeting. Kenny lifted an eyebrow. "That's new." Jasmine said, "They smell blood in the water, and they don't want to get caught acting like they didn't know." But no one, not even Jasmine, saw how swiftly people outside of politics would choose a side. It all began with a short video clip that was only 31 seconds long. Jasmine Crockett, sitting at the round table, calmly slides a paper across the desk and says, "If there are lies, you should welcome an investigation." A political blog with fewer than 1,000 followers shared the tape again. Then a digital rights group did, and finally a retired journalist with a large YouTube following did. It got more than 11 million views by midday the next day. And then there were the reaction videos. Teenagers on TikTok broke down the discussion like it was a sports replay. Legal experts did frame-by-frame analysis, and even comedians added commentary, calling it the most elegant takedown in political history. But the movement wasn't simply online. Philadelphia and Cincinnati's local radio stations talked about it in their morning shows. Church groups and book clubs shared the video over group conversations. People were talking about things they had never talked about before. Jasmine sat on the edge of her desk with her arms crossed and watched the numbers go up. Kenny was shocked and scrolled next to her. "We didn't push this. We didn't plant it, but here we are." Jasmine stated people were ready for something real. They're sick of everyone acting like power can't be touched. Around the 15 million mark, famous people started to speak out. An actor wrote, "I've never seen someone hold their own like that." Crockett didn't yell. She just showed up with the truth. An NBA player sent a video with the words, "We need more of this." Even more surprising were the DMs that Jasmine got from people she never would have thought would contact her, like former campaign staffers for political opponents, think tank staffers, and even 2 former Trump insiders who had once proudly defended Melania. One message stood out. A woman named Katia Merkovich sent it. She said she had worked on one of Melania's early branding projects for a short time in 2004. Her message said, "What she's saying is true. I didn't get it back then, but I could see how things were set up. We weren't allowed to keep records, and her cousin took care of all the contracts. She just accepted cash." Jasmine told her lawyer what she wanted to say. "If she agrees to talk, even if it's not on the record, we can double-check what we have." In the meantime, Jasmine's team built a separate encrypted inbox for fresh tips. In less than 48 hours, they got more than 400 responses. These included a retired bookkeeper from Wilmington, a former assistant at a Miami consulting firm, and even someone who used to work at a law firm that filed patents for businesses in other countries. Not everyone had proof, but the stories were the same: money moving, missing invoices, and projects that were only on paper. By Friday, the popular mood had definitely changed. It wasn't just a moment that was popular. People all throughout the country were talking about it. Some cable news anchors tried to dismiss it as an overreach by a first-term lawmaker, while others called for probes. But the smaller local news outlets were the ones that really got the fire. There were a lot of op-eds with titles like, "Why did we ever stop asking questions about Melania?" We all thought the same thing, but it took a lady like Jasmine Crockett to say it. Not speaking isn't grace, it's a plan. Jasmine didn't talk to the press. She didn't say anything on Twitter. Her silence simply made things worse. At the same time, Melania's team started to fall apart. First, they called off a speech they were supposed to give at a Tampa fundraiser for a university. Then they backed out of a women's meeting in Palm Desert. Lawyers were said to be working hard behind the scenes to go over old filings, partnerships, and any other documents that could be linked to the new charges. Melania still didn't show up in public. There was no video, no interview, and only a fresh statement on our website. These attacks are very personal and come from a place of separation. I've always been honest and done the right thing. It won't work to destroy my character. It sounded scripted, cold, and distant. Jasmine's clear, no-nonsense tone on live TV is the exact opposite. People like the difference. Jasmine's direct, clear view of people. A woman from Montana wrote to the editor, "I don't care about parties anymore." That woman talked like she had nothing to lose and everything to protect. That matters. Kenny looked up from the rising pile of mails and remarked, "We started something." Jasmine didn't grin. "Now we finish it," she said. The hush around it became more dangerous as Jasmine got closer to the truth. By the second weekend after the show, Jasmine was used to waking up to voicemails from numbers she had banned. Some were merely heavy breathing, while others played short, warped, chopped, and twisted audio samples of her public statements to make fun of her. She didn't flinch, but she also didn't ignore them. There was more security. The Capitol Police put 2 plainclothes officers on her to follow her about when she was in public. Her apartment building in Washington, D.C. put in cameras. Kenny told her to stay in a motel for a time. Jasmine said no. She said, "No one will scare me out of my own life." Still, the tension was rising, quiet pressure and planned discomfort. She could feel it in meetings that used to be easy. She could tell by the way some of her coworkers avoided eye contact in the hallways. One of the staff members, who had always been kind and talkative, just nodded politely and kept walking. The message was clear: you're becoming a problem. That Monday morning, Someone came to see her who she didn't expect. Howard Reams, a high-ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, came to her office without an appointment. He was wearing a gray suit and carrying a briefcase, and his face looked like granite. He closed the door behind him and said, "We need to talk, Jasmine." She pointed to a seat but didn't sit down herself. "What about optics?" "You're getting the wrong kind of attention." She said, "I'm drawing the truth to me." He stopped and thought carefully about what to say next. There are ways to deal with this that aren't loud. If you get too loud, it turns into a circus. Once the yelling starts, no one pays attention to substance. Jasmine crossed her arms. "I didn't yell. I gave documentation." He bent forward. "You made a very strong family seem bad on national TV. You made a moment that is now going out of control, whether you meant to or not." "I didn't make the spiral. I took the cover off." He let out a sigh. "Do you want my advice? Let it sit. Don't become worse. Let the people get on with their lives." "You've made your point." But she had heard that tone before, men who would rather be quiet than fight, and calm than tell the truth. She knew how to play this game, put pressure on people in secret, and say nice things in public. Kenny came in with another message after he left. This one is from a well-connected lobbyist who says they will help Jasmine's re-election fund if she makes a statement that softens her stance. Jasmine didn't say anything. Ines Gallardo, a former journalist who lived in Arizona, got in touch later that day. She had written an article about how foreign money affects U.S. charities in 2015, but her editor had her leave before it was published. Back then, she had also seen Melania's name. Ines said on the phone, "I still have my notes. The identities, the deals, and even a picture of one of the Shell Company representatives. I remember. I didn't imagine anyone else would care." Jasmine made sure that she could transmit everything safely. She thought the narrative was grander than it was. It was no longer simply about Melania's private data. It was about a whole web of people, including foundations, corporations, and silent partners. Some of them were still active, and some had helped create policy. Every time Jasmine pulled on one thread, another one came undone behind it. Even others who supported her became worried. A group of Democratic donors sent an email to her campaign manager, saying they were very worried about how her public image was going. One line stood out, "We support bravery, but not carelessness." Kenny smashed on "CES, the laptop." Line 1, "They want heroes who are clean, not truth-tellers who are messy." Jasmine said, "Then they chose the wrong woman." Late on Thursday night, the last straw came that week. A delivery person brought her an envelope with no name on it. There was a printed still image from a security camera inside that showed her walking through Reagan Airport with a red circle around her head. There was no message and no sender. A picture that said, "We see you." She presented it to Kenny, who was speechless. "Are you okay?" Finally, he asked. "I'm mad," she said. "Not afraid. Just mad." She put the picture on the wall of her office above the pile of papers and evidence that was getting bigger, not as a prize, but to remind her of who she was dealing with. Fear is what they trade in, and Jasmine wouldn't buy in. But the stress didn't stop her. It was getting her ready for what came next, when the truth came out and everyone had to see it. There wasn't much drama in the hearing room. The walls were pale beige, the chairs were stiff, and the microphones never worked well. You could feel the weight change as Jasmine Crockett went through the double doors that morning. The roundtable has been going around for 19 days. The House Subcommittee on Government Oversight had planned a formal review to talk about Jasmine's charges because of rising public pressure and bipartisan concern. What had started as a 7-minute break and a live show was now a concern for Congress. There were cameras on the walls, reporters were writing quickly, and people were watching from airports, offices, and living rooms. They weren't just interested anymore, they demanded answers. The room was crowded, but not very loud. Jasmine wore a simple dark blazer with no loud colors or striking jewelry. She was just focused. Harold Klein, the subcommittee's head, started off with a neutral tone. Today's session is not a trial. It is not a show of politics. He turned to Jasmine and said, "It's a step toward clarity." Congresswoman Crockett, it's your turn. She didn't thank him or act like she was going to. She changed the mic and started. Everything I showed was based on legal and public documents, such as court filings, money transfers, and documented transactions. This has nothing to do with politics. It's all about patterns. Patterns that suggest misuse of trust, power, and silence. She stopped for a moment, then said, "If these patterns were linked to anyone else, anyone without that last name, this room would have been full years ago." There were gasps, but they remained quiet. Klein looked uneasy as he flipped through his binder. A junior representative from Maine cleared her throat, trying not to. "Are you saying the former First Lady did something wrong?" Jasmine said, "I'm saying she was part of a structure that needs to be looked into, and that until now, no one had the guts to ask the hard questions." At that moment, a paper was shown behind her. It was one of the verified wire transfers that went via a shell company in Dover, Delaware. Jasmine told the committee everything they needed to know, including the date, the receiver, the origin account, and the matching number from a Slovenian asset registry. Everything was connected. There was no air in the room. Melania Trump did not come. Her lawyers sent in a statement that said, "Mrs. Trump doesn't have anything to conceal. I'm not going to be there to dignify political bullying." But the cameras were already moving to every empty chair around the table. The meaning was clear. Something unexpected happened halfway through the session. A former financial compliance officer, who wasn't on the witness list, stood up in the gallery and quietly gave an envelope to the sergeant-at-arms. There were copies of 6 invoices within that were connected to a charitable fund that Melania had publicly supported in Florida. The money never got to the people it was supposed to help. The committee stopped moving. As the papers were handed to her, Jasmine looked at them. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything. Then she added, "This is what happens when you open the door." People eventually speak up. The story was everywhere again by late afternoon, but this time it was more important. There was more than just social media chatter. There were real inquiries from real people, and they were backed up by real papers. Even cable networks that didn't care about the roundtable at first were showing highlights from the hearing over and over again. Kenny stood with his arms crossed and watched. 3 weeks ago, when they first walked into that diner in Fort Worth, they didn't expect this to happen. He told a staff member, "I thought we were going to shake a tree." We started an avalanche. People were protesting outside. Some people held signs to support Jasmine, while others yelled that she was a fraud, a pawn, or worse. It was the normal mayhem of a disagreement, but she didn't hear it. She stayed inside and watched the room alter. Before the hearing ended, Representative Klein cleared his throat again. "We will meet again next week after going over the extra materials that were sent in today." "This is far satanic." Jasmine nodded, stood up, and danced out of the room without saying a word. Cameras followed, and microphones got longer. She didn't say anything, but people were speaking for her now, strangers, specialists, and survivors of financial fraud who saw the signals in what she had said. Voices that had been quiet for a long time were now being heard all around the country. Her narrative had become a spark. Now, the whole country was watching the fire. But the fire's purpose was never to destroy. It was meant to burn away what was underlying. 2 weeks after the hearing, Jasmine was alone on a quiet balcony outside her district office in Arlington, Texas. The sun was low in the sky. Reporters were still calling, investigators were still pushing for more, and her email was still filled. But for the first time in more than a balcony month, the commotion surrounding her seemed controlled and concentrated. Kenny came over with a new pile of messages. 2 more subpoenas were sent out this morning, and next week the committees will look over the charity files. Jasmine nodded, but her mind was somewhere else. She gazed out at the horizon and added, "You know what I keep thinking about? The folks who wanted me to leave it alone." Someone told me I was going too far and that I would lose my career if I spoke up. Kenny remarked, "You didn't ruin anything. You reminded people why truth is still important." But she was aware that it was more difficult than that. She had no regrets, even though her staff had been threatened, her mother had been attacked online, and lobbyists had canceled appointments. There was never any plan to take down Melania Trump. It was always about getting rid of the idea that people who were rich, well-spoken, or quiet didn't have to deal with their history. That illusion was gone now. There was a change, whether or not charges were ever filed or congressional hearings went on. People have seen what it looked like when someone stood up and didn't give in. They also learned what it takes to do it. In the weeks after the hearing, more whistleblowers came forward. These included a former lawyer who worked on foreign licensing deals, a bank analyst who reported suspicious transactions in 2010, and even a Slovenian journalist who had been banned from working after writing about Melania's early financial dealings. They had never talked to each other before. They were now submitting papers, statements, and even eager to testify. A woman from New Jersey who worked as a translator left Jasmine a voicemail that she would always remember. "I didn't say anything for years because I didn't think anyone would care. But you got them to listen. You didn't yell. Things you didn't do. You just came with the truth. Thank you." That statement remained with Jasmine more than any trendy hashtag or news. She realized that people still didn't believe her. They always would. People had told her that she was doing it for attention, that she was angry, that she was attempting to develop a brand, all the old labels that were supposed to make someone who wouldn't sit down feel small. But none of that mattered now. The important thing was the ripple she started. Students were learning about the hearing in class as part of their media literacy lessons. Activist groups were using her case as an example to fight for laws that would make things more open. At first, other lawmakers were quietly asking more questions about financial declarations, foundations, and connections to other countries. Jasmine didn't want to start a movement. She only wanted to tell the truth and not get in trouble for it. And by doing that, she reminded people of something they had almost forgotten. Quiet may protect the powerful, but courage shows what power seeks to hide. Kenny went back to work and gave her a letter. There is no name, only a return address in Des Moines. It said, "I used to think that the system couldn't be changed and that people like me didn't matter. But seeing you stand up with facts in your palm and passion in your voice made me believe again. Thanks for making me feel like you saw me." Jasmine put the letter in her desk drawer after folding it. She didn't know who sent it, but she knew exactly why it was delivered. Not every fight ends up in court. Some finish with a change. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just not be quiet. She looked at Kenny and said, "This isn't over." He answered, "No." But now they know who's looking. That was the only thing that was different. When people inquire about the day Jasmine Crockett confronted Melania Trump on live TV, the papers she showed, and the uproar that followed, it's not just a story about scandal or headlines. It's a story about what happens when someone who has nothing to gain and everything to lose decides to reveal the truth nevertheless. If this tale made you think twice about being quiet, stand up, share it, and talk about it. We give up our power the moment we stop asking questions. If you think the truth still matters, sign up. There will be more stories.